My son texted coldly, "Dad, this Thanksgiving is family only. You've been crossed off the list." His arrogant wife added the knife. "You don't deserve a seat at our table, old man." I smiled quietly and replied, "Fine. Canceling all your house payments right now." I blocked them both. Minutes later, 87 panicked missed calls from people who suddenly remembered I existed. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 68 years old and I live in Plano, Texas, a quiet suburb north of Dallas, where the lawns are always green and the neighbors wave at each other from their porches. I spent 40 years as a chief accountant for Morrison Construction, counting every penny, balancing every ledger, making sure nothing ever slipped through the cracks. I retired 5 years ago, thinking I'd finally have time for the things I loved: carving wooden toys in my workshop, playing chess at the Knights Move Club on Legacy Drive, maybe watching my grandchildren grow up. I always believed that if you worked hard and loved your family, everything else would fall into place. Turns out I was a fool. My son Jason is 41 now. Strange how I still remember him as that 7-year-old boy who used to run toward me the moment I got home from work, his arms wide open, shouting, "Daddy's home!" We were inseparable back then. Every Saturday morning we'd go fishing at Lake Lavon, just the two of us. He'd tell me about school, about his friends, about the girl he thought was cute in his class. He asked for my advice on everything, from choosing his college major to buying his first car. I thought we'd always have that bond. Everything changed 6 years ago when Jason met Melissa. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Blonde hair, perfect smile, the kind of woman who knows exactly how to work a room. She worked as what she called an influencer. 3,000 followers on Instagram, posting pictures of her morning coffee like it was art. In reality, she was a housewife who thought she was too good for the title. The first time Jason brought her to my house for dinner, she looked around my modest living room like she'd stepped into a thrift store. "Quaint," she said, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Very vintage." I should have seen it then. The way she touched Jason's arm whenever he started talking to me, pulling his attention back to her. The way she'd check her phone in the middle of conversations, sighing loudly when I told stories about the old days. But I wanted my son to be happy. So I smiled, and I welcomed her into my family. The transformation was gradual, like watching a photograph fade in sunlight. First, the weekly phone calls became monthly. Then the visits dropped from every Sunday dinner to holidays only. When Jason did come by, Melissa was always there, controlling every conversation like a puppeteer with invisible strings. If I mentioned our fishing trips, she'd suddenly need to leave. If I tried to give Jason advice, she'd roll her eyes and mutter something about outdated thinking. "Dad means well," I overheard Jason telling her once. "He's just old-fashioned." Old-fashioned? Is that what they called it now? Caring about your son? 5 years ago, when Jason mentioned they were looking for a house, I made what I thought was the most generous decision of my life. I bought them a 2-story home on Oakmont Lane, a beautiful place in a good neighborhood, 4 bedrooms, a big backyard for the kids. $485,000. Cash. No mortgage. I kept it in my name, of course. 40 years of accounting taught me never to sign away assets without protection, but I let them live there rent-free. Every month I paid $1,050 for their property taxes, insurance, and utilities. Every single month for 5 years. They never thanked me. Not once. And then, on a Friday morning in mid-November, I received the text message that changed everything. I was in my workshop, sanding a wooden horse I'd been carving for my grandson Ethan. The boy is 9 years old, full of energy, and he's taken an interest in woodworking. His sister Lily, 12, is quieter. She loves books and has her grandmother's gentle eyes. Those kids are the only good thing to come out of Jason's marriage. My phone buzzed on the workbench. A message from Jason. "Dad, this year's Thanksgiving is family only. You've been crossed off the list." I stared at the screen. Read it again. Family only. Crossed off. As if I were some distant relative they'd rather forget. As if I hadn't spent 40 years building a life so my son could have everything he needed. Before I could process it, another message appeared. This one from Melissa. You don't deserve a seat at our table, old man. Time to know your place. I set the phone down slowly. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I'd expected anger, maybe even tears. Instead, I felt something cold settle in my chest. The kind of cold that doesn't come from grief. It comes from clarity. For years, I'd told myself that Jason was still my boy underneath it all. That Melissa was just difficult, not malicious. That if I kept giving, kept sacrificing, kept loving unconditionally, eventually they'd appreciate me. But you can only pour water into a cracked vase for so long before you realize it will never hold. I picked up my phone and typed a response. All right, I'm canceling your house payments right now. Then I blocked both their numbers. I set the phone face down on the workbench and returned to carving Ethan's horse. The wood was smooth under my hands, warm from the friction of the sandpaper. I worked for another hour, focused on the curve of the mane, the arch of the neck. When I finally set down my tools and checked my phone again, I had to laugh. 87 missed calls. I turned off the sound and went to make myself some dinner. I slept better that night than I had in years. The calls continued through the darkness. My phone lighting up on the nightstand again and again, a silent strobe of desperation. I didn't answer. Instead, I lay in bed and let memories wash over me. I remembered teaching Jason to ride a bike in our old backyard. He must have been 5, knees scabbed from failed attempts, but he refused to give up. One more time, Dad, he kept saying, jaw set with determination. When he finally made it down the driveway without falling, the pure joy on his face made everything worth it. He ran back and jumped into my arms. I did it, Daddy. Did you see? I saw, son. I always saw. I remembered his graduation, how he'd searched the crowd until he found me, then pointed and mouthed, Thanks, Dad. I'd raised him alone after his mother passed, working overtime to pay for tutors and sports. Seeing him in that cap and gown, I knew every sacrifice had been worth it. Where did that boy go? When did my son become a stranger wearing a familiar face? I remembered the exact moment I lost him, 3 years ago at Lily's birthday party. I'd driven 40 minutes with a handmade dollhouse I'd spent 2 months building, every shingle carved by hand. When I walked in, Lily's face lit up. She reached for it with trembling excitement, but Melissa stepped between us. That's sweet, Harold, she said with false warmth, but we already got her a tablet. Kids don't play with wooden toys. Maybe donate it somewhere. I looked at Jason, waiting for him to defend the gift, to defend me. He shrugged. Melissa knows what's best for the kids, Dad. I left the dollhouse in their garage. They threw it away a month later. Ethan told me, his little face confused. Grandpa, why did Mommy throw away Lily's house? It was so pretty. I didn't have an answer. I still don't. By morning, my phone had accumulated a novel's worth of messages. Jason first, Dad, what happened? Then Melissa, this is illegal. We'll sue you. Later, Dad, let's talk. It's a misunderstanding. Finally, you're going to regret this. I made breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. The sun was streaming through my kitchen window. Beautiful day. The knock came mid-morning, Melissa's voice through the wood. Open this door. You can't hide. Jason, Melissa, calm down. Your father has lost his mind. I took my time. When I opened the door, my face showed only calm. Jason looked exhausted. Wrinkled shirt, dark circles under his eyes. Melissa was fully made up, dressed in expensive clothes my money likely paid for. Harold, she started, we need to discuss this tantrum of yours. Good morning, Melissa. You look well rested. This isn't a joke. Can't I do what I want with my money? Dad, Jason stepped forward. Whatever Melissa texted, she didn't mean to call me an old man who doesn't deserve a seat at your table. To tell me to know my place? Which part didn't she mean exactly? Jason went pale. She said what? So he hadn't read her message. Just followed orders like always. I almost felt sorry for him. Melissa jabbed her finger at me. You're blackmailing us. No, dear. This is consequences. You wanted Thanksgiving without me. You've got it. But without my house, too. Jason's voice cracked. What do you mean, your house? The house I bought, in my name, that I've paid taxes on for 5 years while you lived free. I watched realization dawn on his face like a slow sunrise. Did you think I gave away $500,000 without keeping the deed? I'm an accountant, Jason. I don't make those kinds of mistakes. Melissa went white. You're lying. That house is ours. Living somewhere and owning it are two very different things. I stepped back. Now, if you'll excuse me. Chess club at 2. We'll take you to court, she screamed as I began closing the door. Please do. I'd love to show a judge exactly how much I spent while you treated me like garbage. I smiled. Happy Thanksgiving, Melissa. I closed the door on her screaming. That afternoon, I called a lawyer named Nathan Prescott, real estate and family law, made an appointment for Monday. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not sadness, purpose. A clear, cold sense of direction. They wanted to play games with the old man? Fine. But I spent 40 years making numbers add up perfectly. Every decimal, every ledger entry. And right now, the numbers were very simple. Everything they had, I could take away. That evening in my workshop, my phone buzzed. The preview caught my eye. From Lily's number. Grandpa, why is Mommy crying? She says we might lose our house? I'm worried about you. I stared at the screen for a long time. My grandchildren, Lily and Ethan. They had nothing to do with their parents' cruelty. They were innocent, caught in a war they didn't understand. I set down the phone without responding, but looking at Ethan's unfinished wooden horse, I made a silent promise. Whatever battles came next, those children would not become casualties. I would protect them, even if it meant destroying everything their parents had built on my shoulders. How far was I willing to go? I picked up my carving knife and went back to work on the horse, as far as it takes. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. I put on my best suit, navy blue, the one I wore to retirement parties, and drove downtown to Parker Road. Nathan Prescott's office occupied the 3rd floor of a modest brick building between a dental clinic and an insurance agency. Not flashy, but the reviews said he was thorough. That's what I needed. The receptionist led me to a corner office where Prescott was waiting. He was in his mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of face that suggested he'd seen every trick in the book. We shook hands, and I sat down across from his cluttered desk. Mr. Bennett, he said, flipping open a legal pad, your message mentioned a property dispute with family members. Walk me through it. I did. I told him everything. The house purchased 5 years ago, the monthly payments, the years of disrespect, and finally the text messages that started this war. I'd brought a folder, the deed to the house on Oakmont Lane, 5 years of bank statements, and printed screenshots of the messages from Jason and Melissa. Prescott studied the documents for several minutes, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up. Let me make sure I understand. You purchased the property outright. Your name is the only one on the deed. You've been covering all property taxes, insurance, and utilities, approximately $1,150 per month for 5 years, totaling roughly $111,000. Your son and daughter-in-law have lived there rent-free this entire time, contributing nothing. Is that correct? That's correct. He leaned back in his chair. Mr. Bennett, your legal position is solid. You own the property. You have every right to ask them to vacate. Under Texas law, you'll need to provide a 30-day written notice to vacate. If they refuse to leave after that period, you can file for formal eviction through the courts. What about my grandchildren? The words came out harder than I intended. They're 12 and 9. I don't want them hurt by any of this. Prescott nodded slowly. The children will go where their parents go. That's standard. However, if there's evidence of neglect or an unstable home environment, you could potentially petition for temporary custody or visitation rights. That's a separate legal battle, and frankly, a much more difficult one. I absorbed this. The thought of Lily walking 2 miles in the dark kept circling in my mind. What do you recommend? Prescott tapped his pen against the desk. First, we send the 30-day notice to vacate. Formal, certified mail. Second, we prepare a demand letter. If they don't leave voluntarily, you'll seek reimbursement for the $111,000 you've spent maintaining their residence. That gives them financial incentive to cooperate. Third, we wait. See how they respond. I smiled. Trust me, Mr. Prescott. Rash is Melissa's middle name. He almost smiled back. One more thing. Document everything from this point forward. Every conversation, every text message, every encounter. If this goes to court, you'll want a paper trail. I thanked him, wrote a check for his retainer, and left with a clear plan. That evening, my neighbor Dorothy Mitchell stopped by with a casserole. Dorothy was 71, a retired nurse with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She'd lived next door for 15 years. "Harold," she said, setting the dish on my counter. "I saw Jason and that woman at your door Saturday. Quite a scene." "You could hear her from your house?" Dorothy snorted. "From the next county. What's going on?" I told her the short version. Her expression shifted from curiosity to disgust. "They actually told you that you weren't welcome at Thanksgiving? After everything you've done for them?" Melissa's exact words were that I don't deserve a seat at their table. Dorothy shook her head. "That woman is a piece of work. I've seen how she looks at you, Harold, like you're something she scraped off her shoe. And Jason just lets her." "Jason stopped being Jason a long time ago." She patted my arm. "Well, if you need anything, a witness, a character reference, someone to accidentally run over Melissa's petunias, you let me know." I laughed for the first time in days. "I'll keep that in mind." After Dorothy left, I sat in my workshop staring at the wooden horse. Nearly finished now, just needed the final sanding. I'd planned to give it to Ethan for Christmas. Now I wasn't sure I'd see him at Christmas. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Bennett, this is attorney Rachel Torres, representing Jason and Melissa Bennett. My clients are filing a claim of promissory estoppel regarding the property at 1523 Oakmont Lane. They allege you made an oral promise to transfer ownership, which they relied upon to their detriment. We will seek full recognition of this agreement and damages." I read the message twice. Then I started to laugh. Promissory estoppel. They were claiming I'd promised them the house, that I'd made some verbal agreement, that they'd relied on this supposed promise. 5 years of free rent, 5 years of me paying every bill. And they were suing me. I forwarded the message to Prescott. "It begins." His reply came within minutes. "Good. Let them make the first move. It's always easier to counterpunch." The next few days brought a strange kind of quiet. No more pounding on my door, no more screaming on my lawn. Melissa had apparently decided that her lawyer would do the talking now. That suited me fine. I had my own preparations to make. But first, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I went back through those 87 missed calls from that first night. I'd saved them all. Every voicemail, every frantic message. Now I sat in my kitchen with a notebook and listened to each one, taking detailed notes. The first 10 messages were from Jason, confused and almost pleading. "Dad, what's going on? Why won't you answer? Call me back." His voice sounded young, uncertain, like the boy I remembered before Melissa got her hooks into him. Then Melissa took over. Message 15. "You can't do this. We have rights. I'm calling our lawyer." Message 23. "This is extortion, Harold. Pure and simple. You're going to regret this." Message 31. "Answer your phone, you coward. Face us like a man." The messages continued, cycling between threats and bargaining. Jason would leave something soft and confused. Then Melissa would follow with something harsh and aggressive. By message 50, her voice had turned shrill with panic. "The utilities! The insurance! What are you doing?" The last message was Jason alone. His voice was quiet, almost broken. "Dad? Why?" I closed my notebook and sat in silence. That final question echoed in my head. Why? As if he didn't know. As if 6 years of choosing Melissa over his own father hadn't built to this moment. As if telling me I wasn't family anymore was something I should have just accepted. I recorded copies of the voicemails onto a digital file and emailed them to Prescott. His response came the next morning. "These could be useful. Melissa's threats show a pattern of aggressive behavior. Keep documenting." While I waited for the legal process to unfold, I did something I'd been avoiding for years. I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I drove past the house on Oakmont Lane, my house, and parked across the street. It was strange, looking at it with new eyes. The lawn needed mowing. The paint on the shutters was peeling. The flower beds Melissa had once maintained for her Instagram photos were overgrown with weeds. They'd stopped pretending years ago. I watched as Melissa's car pulled into the driveway. She got out, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the anger on her face. She slammed the car door and stormed inside without looking back. A few minutes later, a school bus stopped at the corner. Lily stepped off, backpack dragging, shoulders slumped. She looked so small, so tired. She walked up the driveway alone, and I felt my heart twist. This isn't about you anymore, I reminded myself. It's about them, about protecting them from parents who can't even pick them up from the bus stop. I started keeping a log. Every time I drove by, I noted what I saw. Melissa leaving at odd hours. The children coming home to an empty house. Jason's car absent more and more frequently, probably hiding at work to avoid the chaos. A week after my meeting with Prescott, a courier arrived at my door with the formal response to Melissa's lawsuit. I signed for it and sat down to read. They were claiming I'd verbally promised to give them the house within a reasonable time frame, that they'd invested time, energy, and emotional resources into the property based on this promise, that my sudden decision to evict them was causing severe emotional distress and financial hardship. The damages they were seeking, $150,000, plus recognition of their ownership rights. I set down the papers and shook my head. $150,000. For a house I'd bought with my own money, for bills I'd paid for 5 years, for a family that had thrown me away like last week's garbage. I called Prescott. We proceed. Send the 30-day notice. Prepare the counterclaim. You're sure? He asked. Once we file, there's no going back. This will get ugly. I thought about Lily's message, about Ethan's confused face when they threw away his sister's dollhouse, about 30 years of love poured into a son who couldn't even stand up to his wife. It's already ugly, I said. I'm just done pretending it isn't. The notice went out by certified mail and personal courier. 30 days. They had 30 days to vacate my property, or I would begin formal eviction proceedings and pursue full reimbursement of every cent I'd spent. 2 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jason's name. He must have gotten a new number. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. Dad, please, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Melissa is... She's not thinking clearly. The kids are scared. Can we please talk? I saved the message and added it to my file. Then I went back to my workshop and finished sanding Ethan's horse. The wood was smooth now, warm under my hands. I'd give it to him eventually, when the time was right, when this was over. Because it would be over, one way or another. I just hadn't decided yet how much it was going to cost them. 3 days before Thanksgiving, Melissa launched her counterattack. Dorothy showed up at my door that morning with her phone in hand and a look somewhere between disgust and amusement. Harold, you need to see this. She handed me the phone. On the screen was a Facebook post from Melissa's account. A long emotional screed, accompanied by a photo of her looking tearful in front of the house on Oakmont Lane. Please share this with everyone you know. My father-in-law, who we have cared for and supported for years, has decided to throw us out of our home just before the holidays, with our 2 young children. He is doing this out of spite because we couldn't accommodate his demands for Thanksgiving dinner. This cruel, vindictive man is trying to make us homeless. We need prayers and support during this difficult time. I read it twice, then handed the phone back to Dorothy. Cared for me? When exactly did that happen? Between not inviting me to family dinners or when they threw away the dollhouse I made for Lily? 247 likes, Dorothy said, scrolling. Comments full of people calling you a monster. Someone even said you should be investigated for elder abuse. Against yourself, apparently. I laughed, actually laughed. Melissa always did have a talent for fiction. Maybe she should write novels instead of Instagram posts about her morning coffee. But underneath the laughter, something cold settled in my stomach. This wasn't just a tantrum anymore. This was a calculated move, positioning herself as the victim, building public sympathy before the court date. If this got out of hand, it could affect how a judge saw me. I called Prescott and read him the post. Don't respond publicly, he said immediately. Don't engage with comments. Don't post your own version. That's exactly what she wants. It makes you look defensive. So I just let her lie about me? For now. But here's what we do instead. We gather counter-evidence. Talk to neighbors, people who've actually seen how they treat you. Get written statements. When this goes to court, We show the judge who's really telling the truth. That afternoon, I drove to Oakmont Lane, not to confront anyone, just to talk. I started with the house next door. Mrs. Ramirez, a friendly woman in her 60s who'd lived there for 20 years. She invited me in for coffee. "Mr. Bennett," she said, settling into her kitchen chair, "I've watched your son and his wife for 5 years now. You want to know what I've seen?" "Please." "I've seen you come by maybe twice a year. Birthdays, mostly. You'd bring presents for the children. Beautiful things. Looked handmade. And every time, Melissa would barely let you through the door. She'd stand in the living room with her arms crossed, checking her watch, like she was timing how long until you'd leave. Did you ever see them help me with anything? Drive me anywhere? Visit me?" Mrs. Ramirez looked at me like I'd asked if the sky was green. "Mr. Bennett, I didn't even know where you lived until all this started. They never mentioned you except to complain." I wrote down her statement. She signed it without hesitation. I visited 3 more neighbors that afternoon. The stories were remarkably consistent. No one had ever seen Jason or Melissa caring for me. No one had heard them mention me with any warmth. One neighbor, Mr. Patterson, recalled Melissa complaining loudly at a block party about Harold's constant interference. By the time I drove home, I had 4 signed statements. 4 witnesses who would tell a judge exactly what kind of care I'd received. Thanksgiving arrived cold and gray. I woke early, made coffee, and stood at my kitchen window watching the empty street. 30 years ago, this house had been full of noise on Thanksgiving morning. Jason running around underfoot while his mother cooked. The smell of turkey and pie. Laughter. Now it was just me. I cooked anyway. A small turkey breast, mashed potatoes, green beans, the same recipe Jason's mother used to make. I ate alone at the kitchen table, looking at old photographs I'd pulled from a box in the closet. There was Jason at 5, sitting on my shoulders at a county fair. Jason at 10, holding up a fish we'd caught together. Jason at 18, graduation cap on his head, grinning at the camera. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost that boy. Maybe I'd never get him back, but I could still protect his children. That evening, just after sunset, I heard a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Dorothy had already stopped by with pie earlier. I set down my book and walked to the entrance. When I opened the door, my heart stopped. Lily stood on my porch, alone. She was wearing a thin jacket, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her eyes were red from crying. "Grandpa," her voice was barely a whisper, "can I stay with you? Mom and Dad have been fighting all day. It's really bad. Ethan is hiding in his room and I couldn't stay there anymore." I pulled her inside immediately. "How did you get here?" "I walked." 2 miles. In the dark. A 12-year-old girl had walked 2 miles through the November night because her home wasn't safe. Something inside me hardened into steel. I wrapped Lily in a blanket and made her hot cocoa while she sat shivering on my couch. Her hands trembled as she held the mug, knuckles white against the ceramic. "Tell me what happened," I said gently. She stared into the cocoa. "It started after dinner. Mom was on the phone with her lawyer, yelling about how everything was falling apart. Then Dad came home and she started yelling at him too." "What did she say?" "That it was his fault. That if he'd been a better son, you would have given them the house. That he was weak and useless." Lily's voice cracked. "Dad just stood there. He didn't say anything back. And then Ethan started crying, and Mom screamed at him to shut up, and I couldn't stay there." She couldn't finish. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I sat beside her and put my arm around her shoulders. "You're safe here, Lily. You're safe." We sat like that for a long time. Eventually, her breathing steadied. The shaking stopped. But my mind was racing. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a child walking 2 miles in the dark because her mother couldn't control her temper. This was a 9-year-old boy hiding in his room while his parents' marriage collapsed around him. I made a decision. I picked up my phone, unblocked Jason's number for the first time since this started, and called. He answered on the second ring. "Dad?" "Your daughter is at my house," I said. My voice was calm, but there was iron underneath it. "She walked here, alone, in the dark, because she didn't feel safe in your home." Silence on the other end. "You have 1 hour to come get her. If you're not here in 1 hour, I'm calling Child Protective Services. and I will tell them exactly what Lily told me about what's happening in that house. Dad, wait. 1 hour. The clock starts now. I hung up. 42 minutes later, headlights appeared in my driveway. Jason got out of the car alone. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 2 weeks. His shirt was untucked, his hair unwashed. Dark circles carved deep shadows under his eyes. His shoulders slumped like a man carrying weight he couldn't bear. I met him at the door. Lily stayed inside, watching through the window. "Where's Melissa?" Jason's jaw tightened. "Home. I told her I was handling this." "Handling it? Like you've been handling everything else?" He flinched like I'd slapped him. "Dad, I know things have gotten out of control." "Out of control?" I stepped closer, keeping my voice low. "Your 12-year-old daughter walked 2 miles in the dark because she was afraid to be in her own home. Your 9-year-old son hides in his room crying. That's not out of control, Jason. That's failure. Your failure." His eyes glistened. "I didn't know it was this bad. You didn't want to know. There's a difference." Jason stood there, hands hanging at his sides. He looked broken, like something inside him had finally snapped. For a moment, I saw the little boy who used to run to me when he was scared. "What do you want me to do, Dad? Tell me. I'll do anything." "I want you to be a father. A real one. The kind who protects his children instead of hiding from his wife. Can you do that?" "I don't know," he whispered. "Then figure it out. Because if those children are hurt because you were too weak to stand up, I will take them from you. I will use every resource I have. Do you understand?" Jason nodded slowly. "I understand." Lily appeared at the door. She looked at her father, then at me. "I have to go back, don't I?" I knelt down to her level. "For now? But if you ever feel unsafe, ever, you call me. You come here. This door is always open for you." She threw her arms around my neck. "I love you, Grandpa. Please don't disappear." "I won't." I hugged her tight. "I promise." I watched them drive away, Lily's face pressed against the window until they turned the corner. The taillights disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, I called Prescott. "I need information about emergency custody procedures in Texas. Not full custody, temporary. Something I could file quickly if the situation at my son's house deteriorates." Prescott was quiet for a moment. "That's a difficult path, Harold. Courts don't like intervening in parental rights without strong evidence." "I'm working on evidence." I told him about Lily, about her walking through the dark, about Ethan hiding, about the screaming. "Document everything," he said. "Dates, times, what the children tell you. Get neighbors to confirm any instances of neglect. But this will get ugly. They'll paint you as vengeful. Let them try. Those kids are the only thing that matters now." After I hung up, I walked to my workshop. Ethan's wooden horse sat finished on the bench, gleaming in the morning light. I ran my hand over the smooth curves of its mane. "I'm sorry, buddy," I said quietly. "I'm sorry your parents aren't who you deserve." I set the horse on a shelf and reached for a fresh block of wood. A jewelry box for Lily. Something to remind her that someone was always thinking of her. I started carving. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. Official court seal. I opened it standing in my driveway, the December wind cutting through my jacket. Jason and Melissa Bennett versus Harold Bennett. They claimed breach of oral contract, seeking ownership rights to the house and $150,000 in damages for emotional distress. The hearing was scheduled for mid-January. I folded the papers carefully. So this was how it would end. In a courtroom. My own son suing me for a house I'd bought with my life savings. Fine. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. But they had no idea who they were fighting. December settled over Plano like a cold gray blanket. While other families decorated their homes and shopped for presents, I prepared for war. I turned my dining room into a command center. Every receipt, every bank statement, every document I'd accumulated over 5 years went into labeled folders. I built a timeline. Dates, amounts, payments. The numbers told a story that no amount of Melissa's Facebook tears could contradict. Total property taxes paid, $47,200. Total insurance premiums, $3,100. Total utilities covered, $33,450. Grand total, $111,450. $111,000 I'd spent keeping a roof over their heads. Money they never thanked me for. Money they apparently thought they deserved to keep, while suing me for more. Prescott reviewed my documentation with visible approval. "This is thorough, Harold. Most clients come to me with a handful of receipts and expect miracles. You've given me ammunition." "Numbers don't lie," I said. "People do, but numbers don't." We prepared our counterclaim. If they wanted to argue about promises, we'd argue about payments. The court would see exactly who had invested in that house and who had only taken. Meanwhile, Melissa's social media campaign continued. Dorothy kept me updated, showing me the posts on her phone with a mixture of disgust and dark amusement. "She's posted another video," Dorothy said one afternoon, settling into my kitchen chair, "crying about how you're ruining Christmas for her children. 63 shares already." "How are the comments?" Dorothy scrolled through them. "Interesting. More people are asking questions now. Why isn't the house in your name? If your father-in-law is so terrible, why did you live in his house for free? Someone even found your address and posted that you're a retired accountant who lives alone. The narrative is cracking." I smiled. Truth has a way of doing that. There's more. Someone claiming to be a neighbor, looks like Mrs. Ramirez, commented that she's never seen Melissa take care of anyone except herself. 22 likes on that one. The tide was turning, slowly, but it was turning. 2 weeks before the court date, I received an unexpected visitor. A man in his early 60s stood on my porch, weathered face, work-worn hands, dressed in a simple button-down shirt. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Kevin Carter, Melissa's father." I studied him for a moment. This was the man who'd raised the woman trying to destroy me, but his eyes held something I didn't expect: shame. "Come in," I said. He sat at my kitchen table, declining coffee, his hands clasped in front of him. "Mr. Bennett, I'm not here to ask you to drop the lawsuit. Melissa made her bed, and she needs to lie in it." He paused, struggling with the words. "But I wanted you to know, I'm sorry, for how she turned out, for what she's putting you through." "You didn't raise her to be like this?" He shook his head. "Her mother died when she was 15. I was working all the time. I own a car wash, nothing fancy, but it kept us going. I think I overcompensated. Gave her everything she wanted because I felt guilty about not being there. Turns out that was the worst thing I could have done." I listened without interrupting. "The thing is, Mr. Bennett, I know my daughter. She's not going to stop. Even if she loses this lawsuit, she'll find another way to make your life difficult. She doesn't know how to admit she's wrong." He looked at me directly. "But those grandkids of yours, Lily and Ethan, they're good kids. They deserve better than to be caught in the middle of this." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm doing this. Not for revenge. For them." Kevin Carter blinked rapidly, his eyes glistening. Then he stood and offered his hand. "For what it's worth, Mr. Bennett, I think you're doing the right thing. And if you ever need someone to testify about what kind of person my daughter really is, well, you have my number." After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen, thinking about what he'd said. Melissa's own father offering to testify against her. That was how far she'd fallen. The deadline for the 30-day notice came and went. I drove to Oakmont Lane on what should have been their last day in my house. The driveway was empty. The windows were dark. But a note was taped to the front door, written in Melissa's handwriting. "We're not leaving. See you in court, old man." I photographed the note, texted the image to Prescott. His reply came within minutes. "They've officially become squatters on your property. This actually strengthens our case. We file for formal eviction tomorrow." I stood on the lawn of the house I'd bought for my son, the house that had become a symbol of everything wrong between us, and felt something unexpected. Not anger, not sadness, anticipation. They wanted to play hardball? Fine. But they'd forgotten the first rule of any game: never underestimate a patient man with nothing to lose. The Collin County Courthouse stood imposing and gray against the January sky. I arrived early, dressed in my best Navy suit, my folder of documents tucked under my arm. Prescott met me in the lobby. "Ready?" "I've been ready for weeks." We entered courtroom 3B together. The room was smaller than I'd expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, rows of hard wooden benches. A few spectators sat scattered throughout, probably here for other cases. but my eyes went immediately to the front row on the other side. Jason sat slumped in his seat, wearing a wrinkled dress shirt that looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of a laundry basket. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. Beside him sat Melissa. She'd clearly prepared for this moment. Black dress, carefully applied makeup, an expression of wounded dignity, the professional victim ready for her performance. Their lawyer was young, maybe 30, with slicked back hair and an expensive suit, hungry-looking, the kind of attorney who took cases on contingency, hoping for a big payout. I took my seat beside Prescott and waited. The judge entered, a stern woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Judge Patricia Hernandez, according to the nameplate. She surveyed the room with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "We're here in the matter of Bennett versus Bennett," she announced. "Property dispute and breach of oral contract claim. Counsel, are you ready to proceed?" Their lawyer stood first. His voice was smooth, practiced. "Your Honor, my clients have lived in the property at 1523 Oakmont Lane for 5 years, based on an explicit verbal promise from the defendant that the house would be theirs. They've invested time, energy, and emotional resources into making it their home. Mr. Harold Bennett's sudden decision to evict them is a betrayal of that promise and has caused severe emotional distress," he went on, painting a picture of a loving family torn apart by a vindictive old man. Melissa dabbed at her eyes with a tissue at all the right moments. Then it was Prescott's turn. "Your Honor, my client purchased the property at 1523 Oakmont Lane 5 years ago for $485,000, paid in full. The deed has always been in his name, and his name alone. He generously allowed his son and daughter-in-law to live there rent-free, while he personally paid all property taxes, insurance, and utilities, totaling $11,450 over 5 years. He placed our documentation on the judge's bench, the deed, the bank statements, every receipt. There was never any written agreement to transfer ownership. There was never any verbal promise witnessed by anyone. There was simply a father trying to help his son, who was repaid with contempt and ultimately excluded from his own family's Thanksgiving celebration." The judge examined the documents carefully. "Mr. Bennett," she said, looking at me, "did you ever tell your son that you would give him this house?" I stood. "No, Your Honor. I bought the house to help him and his family have a stable place to live. I paid for it entirely. I paid all the ongoing expenses. But I never said I was giving it away. I kept it in my name precisely because I wasn't giving it away." "Then why keep paying for it?" "Because they're my family. Because my grandchildren live there. Because I hoped—" I paused. "I hoped that eventually my son would remember that family is about more than free housing." Melissa couldn't contain herself. She jumped to her feet. "He's lying. He promised. He said when we got married that the house would be ours." Judge Hernandez fixed her with an icy stare. "Mrs. Bennett, you will sit down and remain silent unless directly addressed, or I will have you removed from this courtroom." Melissa's face flushed red. She sat, her hands trembling with rage. The judge turned back to the documents. "I'm seeing receipts, bank statements, the original deed. Is there anything from the plaintiffs showing evidence of this alleged verbal agreement? Any witnesses? Any documentation?" Their lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, oral agreements are common in family matters. I asked for evidence, Counselor. Do you have any?" Silence. Judge Hernandez set down the papers. "I've reviewed the documentation provided. The deed clearly shows Mr. Harold Bennett as the sole owner. The bank records clearly show he paid all expenses associated with the property. The plaintiffs have provided no evidence of any agreement to transfer ownership." She looked at Jason and Melissa. "I'm going to take a week to fully review all materials before issuing my final ruling. But I want to be very clear about something. Based on what I've seen today, this case appears to have no merit. I strongly suggest all parties use this time to consider whether continued litigation is truly in anyone's best interest." Court adjourned. In the hallway outside, Prescott shook my hand. That went as well as it possibly could. The judge sees right through them. I nodded, but my attention was elsewhere. Jason had followed us out. He stood a few feet away, Melissa nowhere in sight, probably in the bathroom, composing herself for the next performance. Dad, his voice was hoarse, I didn't want any of this. I turned to face him. My son, the boy I'd raised, the man I barely recognized. But you let it happen, Jason. You let her send those messages. You let her file this lawsuit. You stood by while she called me an old man who didn't deserve to sit at your table. I stepped closer. You had 6 years to choose differently. You chose her every single time. I know. His eyes were wet. I know I did. Then live with it. I walked away without looking back. A week later, I was back in courtroom 3B. The room felt different this time. Smaller somehow. Or maybe I just felt bigger. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the wooden benches creaked as people shifted in their seats. Judge Hernandez entered, her face unreadable. She settled into her chair, arranged her papers, and looked out at us with those sharp, evaluating eyes. I've reviewed all submitted evidence in the matter of Bennett versus Bennett. I'm prepared to deliver my ruling. Melissa sat rigidly in the front row, her hands clenched in her lap. She'd dressed carefully again, black dress, pearl earrings, the picture of wounded dignity, but her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her perfect posture couldn't disguise the trembling in her shoulders. Jason sat beside her, but there was distance between them now. Visible, physical distance. He stared at the floor, unable to look at anyone. Not Melissa, not me, not the judge. The plaintiffs have claimed that Harold Bennett made a verbal promise to transfer ownership of the property at 1523 Oakmont Lane to his son, Jason Bennett. Judge Hernandez's voice was clear and steady. They've argued that they relied on this promise and suffered damages when it was allegedly broken. She paused. However, the court finds no credible evidence to support this claim. No written agreement exists. No witnesses have testified to hearing such a promise. The deed has been in Mr. Harold Bennett's name for the entire 5 years the plaintiffs resided in the property. Melissa made a small sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. Furthermore, the judge continued, the evidence presented by the defendant clearly shows that he personally paid all property taxes, insurance premiums, and utilities for the property throughout this period, totaling $111,450. The plaintiffs contributed nothing financially to the maintenance of the home they claim was promised to them. She looked directly at Jason and Melissa. The plaintiff's claim of promissory estoppel is hereby dismissed. There was no promise, and therefore no estoppel. Melissa's composure cracked. No, this isn't fair. He's lying. He promised us. Mrs. Bennett. Judge Hernandez's voice could have frozen water. I warned you once about outbursts. There will not be a third warning. Melissa fell silent, her face flushed with impotent rage. Additionally, the judge said, the court finds merit in the defendant's counterclaim. The plaintiffs have resided in Mr. Bennett's property for 5 years, without paying rent or contributing to any expenses. While this was initially offered as a gift, the circumstances have changed. She turned a page in her notes. The court orders the following. The plaintiffs must vacate the property at 1523 Oakmont Lane within 60 days. If they fail to do so, they will be liable for the full amount of $111,450 that Mr. Bennett has spent on the property, plus reasonable legal fees and damages. The words hung in the air like a verdict, which of course they were. I sat very still. I had expected to feel triumph, victory, something loud and bright and satisfying. Instead, I felt something quieter, calmer, like finally setting down a weight I'd been carrying for 6 years. Justice, not revenge. Justice. Prescott leaned over and whispered, Complete victory, Harold. They've got nothing. I nodded, but my eyes were on Jason. He hadn't moved, hadn't reacted. He sat frozen in his seat, staring at nothing, like a man watching his entire life collapse in slow motion. Melissa was already on her feet, arguing with their lawyer, her voice rising hysterically, but Jason just sat there, lost. Outside the courtroom, the January wind cut through my jacket. I stood on the steps, breathing the cold air, feeling the tension drain from my body. Footsteps behind me. I knew who it was before I turned. Congratulations, Harold. Prescott extended his hand. You earned this. Did I? I shook his hand. I'm not sure anyone earns something like this. It just happens, and you survive it, or you don't. You survived. So far. I looked back at the courthouse doors. But there's more to come. The hardest part, actually. What do you mean? I thought about Lily walking 2 miles in the dark, about Ethan crying in his room, about my son broken and lost, sitting in that courtroom like a man without a country. My grandchildren, I said. That's what comes next, making sure they're okay. Prescott nodded slowly. If you need anything, references, documentation for custody discussions, you know where to find me. I do. Thank you, Nathan, for everything. I drove home alone, watching the winter sun sink toward the horizon. The house on Oakmont Lane was visible for a moment as I passed the intersection. My house, the house I'd bought with love and hope and foolish optimism. 60 days. In 60 days it would be empty. And then I'd figure out what came next. 3 weeks later, Jason appeared on my doorstep. He looked different, older, tired, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Something that might have been clarity. "Dad," he said, "can we talk?" I let him in. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd shared 1,000 meals when he was growing up. The room felt heavy with memories. "Melissa and I are getting divorced," Jason said. His voice was flat, exhausted. "She filed the papers yesterday." I waited. "She's blaming everyone. Me for not convincing you to back down. Her lawyer for losing the case. Her father for not giving her money." He laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "Everyone except herself. That's how people like Melissa work. The world is always against them. It's never their own choices." Jason looked at me. "How did you know? About her, I mean. How did you see it when I couldn't?" "I noticed things over time. The way she controlled conversations. The way she made you choose between her and everyone else. The way she turned every disagreement into a crisis." I shrugged. Manipulators are good at what they do. I was such a fool. "Yes, you were." He flinched but didn't argue. "But being a fool isn't permanent. You can change. The question is whether you will." He was quiet for a long moment. "The kids, Dad. Melissa says they're in her way. That she needs to start fresh without them. She wants me to take full custody." I felt something cold settle in my chest. What kind of mother abandons her children because they're inconvenient? "What do you want to do?" "I want to be there for them. I want to be the father I should have been." He met my eyes. "But I don't know where to start." I thought about Lily's face pressed against the car window, about Ethan's wooden horse, still waiting on my shelf. "You can stay with me, temporarily, until you figure things out." Jason's eyes went wide. "Dad, after everything, this isn't about you. This is about Lily and Ethan. They need stability. They need to know someone won't abandon them." I stood up. "My door's open for them, not for you. If you let them down again, you're out." "I understand. Thank you." The weeks that followed were complicated. Melissa moved out, taking only personal belongings and filing for divorce. She demanded half of everything, but the house was never hers to split. Her lawyer advised her to settle quickly. She got minimal alimony and standard child support, nothing more. By spring, the dust had settled. Jason found a small apartment 10 minutes from my house. 2 bedrooms, modest, but clean. I rented out Oakmont Lane to a nice young family, $2,400 a month, which I put into a college fund for the grandchildren. The house that had caused so much pain would now build their future. Lily and Ethan came to visit every weekend. Saturday mornings in my workshop, where Ethan and I finished the wooden horse together. Sunday afternoons in the garden with Lily. Jason came too. He started showing up at my chess club, learning the game I'd tried to teach him decades ago. He wasn't good yet, but he was trying. One afternoon in early fall, I ran into Melissa at the grocery store. She looked different, worn. Expensive clothes replaced by something cheaper. Hair unwashed, makeup absent. She pushed a cart with discount items, moving with the shuffle of someone who'd lost everything. When she saw me, her face twisted. "Happy now? You got what you wanted. You destroyed my life." I looked at her calmly, at this woman who had called me an old man who didn't deserve a seat at her table. "No, Melissa, I didn't destroy anything. I simply stopped building your life at my expense. The destruction was all your own work." I walked away without looking back. The following month, we celebrated Thanksgiving at my house. The table was crowded. Lily helped me set out dishes. Ethan proudly displayed the wooden horse we'd painted together. Jason brought a pie. Store-bought, but he was learning. Dorothy came with apple pie. Kevin Carter showed up with flowers. He'd stayed in touch with the grandchildren, determined to be part of their lives. Last year, I said, raising my glass, I was told I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving, that I'd been crossed off the list. Everyone was quiet. This year I see something different. Real family. People who choose to be here. People who earn their place through loyalty and love. I looked at Jason. He met my eyes. Not forgiveness yet, but the beginning of understanding. To family. Not the family we're born with, but the family we build. The family we choose. To family, everyone echoed. Lily squeezed my hand. To Grandpa. The best grandpa in the world. I squeezed back. For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Home. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.